going on here? We've got them at virtually the same phase of the stride. Is this about the knee rolls again?
I'm going to sound horrible. It's for when you go back to looking at bras. So I apologise. I'm going to talk about bras.
If we are forced to make a horse perfect and numb to get into the arena, that is what these riders will do.
Welcome back, and thank you very much to all of you who are supporting this critical topic and for commenting, liking, subscribing to the content. In this session, I'm running some film of some of the movements of the world-class dressage competition in London last December. Great Britain's Becky Moody was the winner with the then 11-year-old gelding Jagabom, sired by Dante Weltino, and Isabel Freese from Norway, who was second with the 12-year-old stallion Total Hope, sired by the highly successful stallion Tortillas. There was less than 1% difference between these two combinations. I've split the screen and shown you them performing the same moves simultaneously so that we can make clear comparisons. So let's get started. Once again, I'm delighted to welcome Anette Karlsson, advanced dressage rider from Sweden, who competes and trains under FEI rules, and who has a rather gifted daughter who, at only 17 years old, has just successfully entered the world of Grand Prix dressage. Bradley Whale from Ipotane Saddles, as well as being a registered human osteopath, he's also an equine osteopath and gifted saddle design and construction innovator. He comes from an engineering background and trained up to Olympic level in a range of different sports, including show jumping. He's also a clinical educator. He's a nerd of the highest order, but always follows up on his lines of inquiry with a highly applied, hands-on approach to his saddle design and his treatments. He has 3 children under 3, so we are hugely thankful to Mrs. Whale for single-handedly holding the nursery fort tonight for us. I'm a veterinary physiotherapist, graduate human sports therapist, certified saddle fitter and clinical educator, currently studying for a professional doctorate in the topic of rider posture, pain and performance, with a special focus on rider low back pain and lumbopelvic function for performance.
Okay, so this is my daughter Tindra, and she's a dressage competitor. She also educates horses and are currently going to school to become a horse educator.
Ooh.
And she competes fairly high. She's just about to go out in intermediate 1 or intermediate 2. We'll see what program it leans towards. And she has competed very successfully up to St. George and have been training on Grand Prix level for several years. She had her horse for 5 years now, I think.
Around that.
5. She got her when she was 12 years old, and she's now just 17 at the moment.
That's impressive. So you're just coming in at the right time to see all the changes which are afoot. So that's absolutely great. So I will run the film. So anything to say or comment on so far?
Yes, in this very moment we see a horse that's not good in the contact, probably a bit tense, and the rider's trying to get him to be more supple. However, that means a bigger pressure in the mouth, and the horse clearly doesn't like that. The lower rein that goes to the weymouth is fairly tense. It actually starts applying pressure before we get the stretch in the rein.
So I can see a curb chain there. It looks tight to me.
Yes.
although it gives the impression that the reins are loose. But yes, I can see the snaffle rein is loose, but maybe not the Weymouth, the curb. So that's one thing. So the horse is working at the moment vertical. But Bradley, this is what I'm interested in here, because this saddle slits forward on the skin. It's placed very, it looks to me, far forward. And I think she's only coming in sitting trot.
Yes.
But all these wrinkles.
Yeah.
And then we've got the scapula, which is very firmly underneath
the actual saddle.
Yeah. So obviously there's two ways of fitting. One is several centimeters behind the rotating scapular cartilage, and the other is immediately behind. So this could be a saddle which is continental and fitted immediately behind. But tell me something about this.
Where do you want to begin? So you can see all the fascial or the skin wrinkling behind or just in front of the saddle.
Yeah.
That creates a lot of what we call fascial pull, which is also compounded by the head positioning as well. So it's not just that the saddle is going forward. You've got to look at the ultimate position of the head and the neck.
Okay.
You can see how it becomes almost like an apex point of forces going in, where the rider is sat in the saddle and where the head and the neck is quite elevated and then creating a lot of wrinkling. What I also find fascinating is actually if you look at her leg positioning, her lower leg, in proportion to her hip and her pelvis, it's a little bit far behind. Now, if you run that video and just watch her as she kind of goes past, it doesn't look aesthetically that, or from a rider's perspective, doesn't look that she's fairly relaxed in that position.
Okay.
She looks like the knee is being deliberately pushed backwards.
Okay. By the knee roll? No?
Yeah, by the knee roll.
Okay.
Now, when you actually start looking at the saddle, look at the entirety of the saddle now.
Yeah.
From the cantle all the way. So all of a sudden, that saddle, it very much looks like it has moved forward.
Yes.
So, because when you first started, it looked like the saddle, you only saw the front part of the saddle, and you can't really make a judgment call from that. But when you start to see the entirety of the saddle and also how the rider is sat on top of it.
Yeah.
Now, what's interesting is where she is positioning herself, in my view, or in my opinion, because that's ideal. Now, every rider always wants to sit in the middle of the saddle.
Yeah.
We mean that both middle, left and right, but also middle, front to back. But we as riders, we also want to sit in the what we call the apex of the curve or the inverted curve of the horse's spine. So when you watch people ride bareback, their pelvis always sits in the same position at the base of the wither.
Can we say anything or comment on the saddle pad or...
The saddle pad is obviously, that's the difficulty, is that because you don't know the principle of how the saddle was fitted, it becomes very difficult to make a judgment call, because you're sat there going, okay, if I know the principle of how you are fitting that saddle, then I can turn around and kind of go, right, saddle's either moved forward or backwards. The difficulty is that, for example, a continental style of fitting a saddle, i.e. where it butts right up to the shoulder, you need a different design requirement for those saddles than what you do when you put a saddle 2 inches further back or a couple 5 centimeters further back from the shoulder blade.
Okay.
Because the design has to be different.
Right. That's a whole other section.
I have a question for Bradley.
Yeah.
The cantle, the back part of the saddle, it seems to be lifted, I mean, quite a bit. What do you think about that?
Do you mean the angle of the seat?
Like I could stuff my hand between the horse and the saddle in the back.
Yes. If there are
lower the pad, between the pad and the saddle.
Right. Okay.
There.
So that is, if we
movement.
Do we have any video work of slightly further away?
Yes.
Because then you'll be able to work out whether she is, more than likely, because it's a dressage saddle, she's on a point strap and a V web at the back. Those are the most common conformations which you get at high performance. And the difficulty is that most people, how's the way to describe this? So the horse's rib cage is not circular and it's not even all the way round. So the problem is that when you look at girths are not designed particularly well. So if you look at a girth, both the straps come to and they finish or they terminate at the same point. So that means that when you girth up the front of the girth and the back of the girth, you are going to have asymmetry in pressure, because the girth straps or the buckles terminate at the same point and they're attached directly to the girth. Because the horse's rib cage is slightly different at the front of where the girth is and at the back of where the girth is. So you actually need an asymmetrical designed girth with the straps in slightly different positions to allow you to then proportionally tighten up the girth. I'm going to describe this in a weird way, asymmetrically, but actually pressure-wise evenly. The difficulty is, because it's a dressage saddle, it's more than likely going to have a point strap and a V strap at the back. Because of the slight inadequacies in the design of girths and girth strapping and billets, you tighten up the girth and you inherently get more pressure on the front of the girth than you will at the back. This
is actually pretty interesting, because when I saw this horse last, he's been in Sweden for many years, and we can see quite a big difference since he changed the rider, that he moved differently. He moved a lot better earlier. At least now we have only seen him in competitions, but it's a big difference in the movements. Less agile now.
What I noticed there was this horse looks very, I don't know, what would you say? He's almost pulling back at the rider. So as she passes, his head is nodding into behind the vertical, even though her hands stay the same. So if any of you want to have a quick word about that. So I'll just run it so you can see what I mean. Here. Here. It's like he can't stretch forward. So this does not look very good to me. And again, you can just see, even when she loosens the rein, how tight that curb chain is. So, okay, shall we keep running?
Yep.
Okay.
If you look at the back of the cantle, you can also see that there's no markers on it.
No markers yet. So let's have a look at that. And this is Becky on her own. Okay, so what can we see here? I'll stop this where we can see Becky's saddle fit. So it doesn't appear to be moving forwards. And again.
So from my perspective, it's a different gait, so it's very difficult to compare from to a canter. But structurally, that saddle looks like it's been positioned slightly further back. It doesn't look like it's so far forward. What's also interesting is that if you look at the girth straps on this one, you can see that they're further apart and that there is a clear gap between the two. It doesn't look as close. It's not kind of focusing in as narrowly as it look like on the other one, which in turn is going to have an impact on stabilization of the saddle, and ultimately the position. The other thing which is difficult is because they have tails, that also obfuscates a lot of the visual markers as well with saddles, so you can't see any lateral movement because your tails are covering it. This is where I was saying beforehand, is this visual kind of trickery which we all play with. If the saddle is moving for some reason or the other, having tails allows you to kind of hide that to a degree. And there are some very clever things which tailors do for tailed jackets in horse riding. So such as where to put the seam lines, how low to have the seam lines. So when the tails split and spread, where do they spread from, if you see what I mean? Tailoring in the jacket so you get more of an hourglass physique. And because you get more of an hourglass physique and more of a flare around the hips, that tail will then hide the leg, the glute, the panel, so on and so forth. We can also use numbers as well, or saddle cloths, by pulling them up right up into the channel, and also having fluff in the middle allows you, or fluff or sheep's wool or anything like that. That also then confuses the eye, so it stops any visual marker for saddles to deviate left and right as well.
Also, I'm thinking I like even though I can't really see this saddle very well, and we'll see it probably better later, but I quite like the balance of this saddle.
Yep.
The horizontal.
You'll also look at where the rider's leg is as well. And as I said, you can't really compare trot to canter, but look at the angle of the calf in relation. It looks suddenly a little bit more relaxed rather than the rider. Previously, it kind of looked like the lower part of the leg was swinging a little bit too far back.
Okay. And I can see this knee roll looks fairly high. Her knee seems to be
quite flush with the material and quite flush with the horse's side.
Yes, there's like it ends here almost, so that she's got a bit of freedom of the knee joint.
Yeah, this is where some saddle manufacturers are going now, is the realization that you need the blocks slightly higher up and tapering the knee block down to the knees. If you keep making blocks bigger, you push the knee further and further out. Whilst if you taper the block so that the knee can then rotate inwards, it's more comfortable for the rider. And that aesthetically suddenly the knee looks like it's theoretically pointing forward rather than pointing out at a kind of at an angle, which then impacts how you apply the leg. Do you apply the leg more from the calf, or do you apply the leg more from the medium or the inside of the calf? That's where you get riders which then turn their toes out, or then if the knee block keeps pushing your knee out, then you can't get your toes pointing forward, if you see in that historical methodology.
And that makes quite a difficult way for the rider to sit comfortably, because everything from your butt to the heels get pushed away from the horse.
Yeah. Wow. So a lot of saddle manufacturers are now starting to come to the realization that actually the blocks higher up, much higher into the kind of the middle of the thigh, and even more up into the groin, is better, because then it doesn't impact the knee position. So
however, in this picture you can see something you didn't see on the last rider. She leaned quite a lot back.
Yep.
And the question is, where does that come from? Does it come from being pushed up of the seat, or
does it come from the movement of the horse? Is it because it's in canter and it's mainly pushing through the glutes and up through, which causes her to slightly hyper extend into the back, into the pelvis?
Yeah.
And the other thing I noticed, I mean, I love this horse's neck. It's very round and it's a smooth, fluent line. I'm looking at
no creasing.
No creasing at the base of the neck.
Yeah.
Because this saddle appears more stable than the earlier one. It's not moving forward.
The earlier horse is extremely short in the back and short in the neck and everything.
Yes.
So they are quite different in the
structures.
Yeah, in the top line. They've got different breed.
Okay. But I was looking at this, ideally this would not be any more than 45 degrees, would it?
No, shouldn't be.
So this is, it's
a
not horizontal, but it still looks like she's operating this rein at this point in time, but horse looks happy enough. Yes, it all does look a bit short there, short-backed and...
Yeah, it very much depends on the fitting principle of the individual doing it. You know, we've got different theories or philosophies on fitting saddles.
Yeah.
Are they on top of the shoulder? Are they behind the shoulder? Are they weight distribution? Is it supposed to stick to the horse like glue? You know, is it a movement reducer? The difficulty is that we don't, as saddle fitters and saddle designers and saddle manufacturers, we don't actually talk about the different philosophies of fitting. And that's going to become more evident the more you keep seeing this. Because you go through the videos and you can see there's a big difference of how the horses perform, just purely from a saddlery perspective.
Okay. Yeah. So I see Becky moving out of the saddle. And also what I can see here, Annette, is that the top horse is very much a leg mover, whereas Becky's horse moves through the body with not much extravagance.
Yeah, that it's much more smooth moving, the lower horse with Becky.
Yes. And I can see more lift of the horse. Possibly, Bradley, is it the leg movers that lift the horse more?
Yeah, you get with high leg moving horses, you get more vertical lift or vertical propulsion upwards, which becomes difficult because they're more difficult to not fit, but to a degree, because more vertical movement, you've got to basically strap the saddle down more because everything's moving too much. You need the seamless kind of flow, which, like, if you look at those two horses and you look at it from the perspective of saddlery and look at the saddles,
there's a lot of movement here.
That's what I mean, is that you are drawn to the saddle at the top or drawn to the rider's leg. All of these things make it that it's jarring. You watch the horse or the horse move. There's a very much a start, middle, and end. It's very jarring. Whilst the one at the bottom it flows a lot easier, and you don't actually your eye doesn't get drawn to the saddle.
Yeah, I'm just seeing the head carriage of this horse. He just looks very backward. Whereas this one, the posture dynamically, this horse's head looks slightly compressed. Annette, any comments with that?
He looks bothered, the top one.
Okay.
I would like to see the next clip to
okay.
Maybe talk a little bit more about it.
Yes. Yeah. Big difference there.
Because we would like to see the horse extend the base of the neck a little bit.
Yes.
It feels like he can't move his head and neck forward.
Okay.
It's like he's blocked. And I feel maybe that could partially be because the saddle is so on top of the shoulders.
Okay. So also thinking in terms of the rules or the guidance for judging. So harmony looks much better below on Becky's horse. He looks more comfortable, more fluent.
Can I just get you to look at the girths?
Oh, yeah.
Look at the structure and the design of the girths. So that's an asymmetrical positioning of the girth straps. That's an asymmetrically designed girth. And then at the top, you look at the buckle. So obviously the image below, the strapping is wider apart. So it allows for greater force distribution over a wider area. And then look at the girth straps and the girth above, it's quite narrow, which is your stereotypical design, basically. And the buckles are, again, they're symmetrically positioned. So you can see where the two, when it slows down, there you go, you can see how the two buckles are very, very close together and they're roughly at the same height.
And also this still looks like almost like a stud guard girth. So it is attempting to distribute pressure, but this one is...
But you can also see the difference on the type of horse, because Total Horse doesn't have very much length on the stomach to have a girth on, because it's just bending away.
Yep.
Oh.
And short horses are difficult to fit everything on, I think.
And also this is a stallion, and this is a gelding. It'd be interesting to find out what age he was gelded, but it was probably early because he doesn't have the neck or the crest that some of them can have that are castrated late. Passage. Annette, anything?
Yeah, I think the harmony on the Becky Moody video is much better in this case. Okay. Obviously a leg mover. We see the movement a lot more, but I think the riders keep pretty still. You don't see a lot of driving yet.
No.
Maybe.
Something else I noticed is that this rider, she's flexing her hip joint up. Is that to encourage the horse up more?
No, I think that's because she can sit more quietly.
See?
When there's a lot of movement. If you look at Becky, you can see that her knees doesn't move up and down. That means that she somehow clamps down on the horse and she keeps herself in the saddle with the knees.
Okay.
In some way or another. Maybe the thigh and
it's because of the knee block.
Bit of the lower leg.
It's because of the knee block.
Can you explain that, Bradley?
Because the knee block is higher on Becky on the bottom image, it is then tapered down at the knee. Okay. You then have something for the knee and the thigh to brace against.
Yeah.
In order to lift the calf and to engage the heel. Because you look at the top one, the knee block comes all the way down to her knee. So if you just backtrack a little bit, you'll be able to see the top image. Look at where her knee is and look where the knee block is. Her knee has got nothing. Her knee is having to go over the knee block in order to get the calf and the heel to lift. Do you see what I mean?
Yes.
When you have the block higher up, more at an angle, more into the groin, and it is tapered down to the knee, all of a sudden you can actually be much quieter in the thigh and actually just lift up through the calf without having to pick up through the hip muscle.
I sort of agree.
It's the way the design of the block is, because you suddenly can kind of lift up through the calf. And you've got a solid-ish structure to brace your knee against.
But you shouldn't brace your knee against a knee block.
I know you shouldn't, but again, it's all of that trickery. But yeah, you're right. You shouldn't.
But I also think if she rode very relaxed in her legs,
Yeah.
The heels would go down in every step. They aren't. They're pretty steady. And that's usually a sign that the rider are clamping on somehow.
Yeah.
There is some sort of tension there. The upper rider is too loose. She uses a lot of driving, very big aids. It makes a lot of movement. I don't think she can sit in any saddle and be quiet with her legs with that technique she uses.
Okay, something you said earlier, Annette, about that the top horse. Did it have other riders? So is this rider new to this horse?
This rider is new to the horse, and he looked like a crawling meatball earlier. You know, if you swim and crawl, you're like flowing in the water, and it looked like a meatball, but crawling. He was moving. The entire horse was moving symmetrically.
Wow, that's
of course, it has big front leg gaits movement. I mean, but his gaits are changed. Something made the gaits change from the previous times I've seen him to now. So something is affecting him in a way that makes him look stiffer.
Right.
And that can be, I've never seen those creases from the saddle before either. But I don't know, it doesn't have to be that. Many things can affect the horse, but it doesn't look the same.
No. Whereas Becky bred this horse, so she's been with this horse right from the start.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's something to be aware of. Do you know how new this horse is? I can look it up later.
I think it's just maybe he left Sweden last year, I think.
Okay.
I think he bred in Sweden last year, and now he's not this year. So it must be fairly new.
Yeah, great.
But one thing which look at the head carriage.
Yeah.
Which one's better? If you actually, and I'm going to be a little bit nitpicky because that's what I am, look at the head carriage between the two. Which one, if you were just looking at the head carriage, which one is better?
This one, because this one's compressed.
Yeah, carry on, watch it.
Okay.
Next bit, as in, so he's now behind.
And this one's throwing his head up and backwards at the cervicothoracic.
Yeah, but look at the head carriage of the image below. This is why it's dangerous, because you've got to look at it as the entirety of it. Is if you were to take that snapshot, the image below suddenly looks behind the vertical.
Yeah.
And this goes back to, we're being very, very nitpicky, but when you actually look at the two, if you were to look at that, I understand, there looks like there's a lot more stress in the upper image and various things like that, and that's accounted for in terms of foaming and so on and so forth. But if you're looking at the purity of it, one looks behind and one looks in front. This goes back to that AI question. If you're looking at the vertical, which one is actually going to get the better mark in that video work if you were just using the vertical head positioning as a singular marker? And this is why you can't look at one single mark. You're one single marker. You have to look at all of them.
So whereas this horse would get, to me, my eye is drawn to the consistency and harmony. So it may not be 100% correct, but this one is
very different. And that's why I'm saying is that it becomes very difficult. This is why judging is very, very difficult, because you're looking at a multiplicity, as what Annette has said before. You're looking at multiple things.
Yeah.
And just taking something in isolation, like the head positioning, is it ahead of the vertical or behind the vertical? In this instance, actually the roles have reversed. The one below is behind the vertical, and the one above is vertical, if not slightly in front.
Yeah. Oh yes, I see it now.
You see what I mean? So this is where you we've always got to remember is we're being nitpicky or we're looking at things in isolation, but actually you very difficult thing to look at the entirety of it.
Yes.
Because one you would say is they're very different moving horses. So I just want to be fair on both sides. I don't want to. That's the reasons why I kind of brought that up.
Yeah. Oh, I'm looking at slight.
You're looking at the kink, aren't you? You're looking at the kink in the bottom image,
and
movement of a spine.
The saddle. Yes, I am.
Yeah, that's exactly where my eye went.
There's slightly more flexion on one side, but it could be the horse. Oh no, she's going with it, isn't she? Yeah, so she moves to the right and not so much to the left.
But you look at the image at the top.
Yeah.
She moves very differently.
I'll go back to that.
You can see Becky, she has the horse just a little bit bent to the left.
Yes.
In the piaffe. And that's probably because it's more straight and can have more impulsion like that. It's very important when you ride these movements that you know how to help the horse the most. I mean, in a perfect world, we would have the horse straight from back to front, but most often the horse has a side that needs to be a little bit more compressed to be able to make the piaffe even. So those.
Annette, I have a question. From the purity of judging, or the purity as a rider sat, which one is correct? If you see what I mean. If the bottom image is more of a left bend, but the other,
I would say, can I see the clip again? Because I can't really judge if Becky's horse are really straight on the line. He has the most consistent. The other one has the most piaffe. I mean, he steps higher and show cadence in the piaffe. So I think it comes down to the little bits, how they judge the little bits in it.
Okay.
I don't know if you could say which one is more correct, because they both have some things that are better and worse.
Yeah, and this is the problem with the marking. What is the judge going to mark? Are they going to suddenly in a couple of seconds award a high mark for this, but deduct for that? And it's really difficult. And I don't think in the mark of 10, which is actually almost a mark of 3 or 4, I don't think there's enough scope in the marking. So it's very difficult. Also, this is a slightly different angle.
Also, this was on about an 8.
Yeah, okay.
Would be my guess.
Okay.
So different things, and it's a bit difficult to see Becky's piaffe because we see most of the tail.
Yes.
But the only reasons why you can start seeing the bottom image, how she moves asymmetrically, like that little kink, which my eye was drawn to, is again because of, look at her jacket, look where all the lines are pointing. Suddenly your eye has that marker. And you look at the top, and because she's wearing black, and you can't see that bending occurring in her body. But you can see it in the bottom image quite clearly when you slow it down.
Yeah.
And again, this goes back to some very clever manipulation. I'm not saying one is right and one is wrong. I'm just saying understand the various markers. Put markers on your saddle or on your clothing at your own risk. Because that's where your eye gets drawn to. Because you've got to be more accurate.
Yeah.
Even to the point of me, as I said about the tails, look at the bottom image, her tail goes slightly higher, so the split in her tail is slightly higher, so you get to see the flash of white of her jodhpurs. Image above, the tail is cut slightly lower, so you don't get to see the flash of white of her jodhpurs.
Oh yeah.
But also these horses work very differently because you have a higher pull up of the legs and more cadence. You also have the entire horse working more to get the legs up. And that's what we can see on Total Hope, that he pulls his leg up and using part of his neck to help.
Yeah, I was going to say, totally agree with you, Annette. You can start to see now that he's actually using his neck muscles with the shoulder in order to get the elevation. You can really start seeing that now.
That makes the impression that the shape of the horse isn't really consistent, but that's the reason it gets like that. It's not really the contact that makes that happen.
Yeah.
And then,
but if he could push his neck slightly forward, then maybe he could relax a little bit more of those neck muscles, and he can use the shoulders to pull his legs up instead. So that can change the pattern.
And the thing is, it also explains the reasons why suddenly, if the horse is utilizing the lower neck muscles in order to elevate the shoulder and as a movement of the shoulder, that explains the vertical movement of the horse's body as an entirety. Because when you look and compare the two, there's a lot more vertical movement with the top horse. Now everything starts to slot into place from my perspective in terms of the saddlery, the positioning, the girthing, the strapping. You suddenly kind of go, right, I understand now your logic. You know, I still don't understand your fitting principle because nobody tells you that, but I can understand why certain things have been done now.
I can't remember seeing the saddle that far in front on top of the withers and on top of the shoulders. I mean, he's a short horse, but he wasn't fitted like that previously, not that I can remember.
As I say, I can't really comment because you don't understand the fitting principle of how they fitted the saddle.
Yeah.
But I know that if you fit a saddle further forward, then you've got to allow for the shoulder rotation underneath in some way, shape, or form. You do that depending on the shape and the contour of the horse's back. So it's all very different.
So obviously the top horse stretches down more. You'd want to see them stretching out a bit more, but yeah, this is quite an unexpected stretch forward that I'm seeing with the top horse. Whereas Becky's horse, there's not too much difference. And I think we've got a longer stride on the top horse. So my question is, because obviously we can see quite a lot in the walk, this looks better to me than this, although it's a slightly different phase in the stride. But which one is more athletic in terms of the competition standard? Annette?
I would say in these clips and so I would say Becky's horse. But if I take horses as they are, I think actually Total Hope has very wide range of motion. So that depends a little bit about what you think is athletic. In a dressage horse, we do want lots of movement, and it has the kind of movement that dressage wants.
Okay, so
that's now we are talking about it as it's bad, but that is what the judges wanted from the dressage horses. Big movements, flashy movements, and we have been breeding it in that direction for many, many years. And now we expect them to be less athletic and smaller movements suddenly. So that will take a little while to change, I think.
And what I see, you talk about the bigger movement, what they want to see. I see possibly more power in engineering terms in this one, but I see the muscle development, the balance of muscle development in this one. In this one, I don't see it.
No, that's very changed too. It's really difficult when you have seen a horse for many years and then you see it's not looking the same. anymore.
Also, look at when it's in the walk. Look at the lumbosacral joint.
Yeah.
Between it and just compare the two.
Yes.
Yeah.
Look at the leg movement. Look at the stifle movement. Look at the hock movement.
So is the top horse more of your high withered, high lift compared with the lower horse? So he's got more reach. Is it the leg length? Is it conformation? What's going on here?
So me personally, if you go back and you go back to the walk, so me personally, when you watch the top horse move, it disengages the shoulder a lot more in the walk.
Yeah.
Which causes the back to drop. So you get more of this kind, and that's why you suddenly look at the rider and she's rocking and rolling forward and backwards. And that's because the horse is actually kind of disengaging the shoulder and it's causing that slight hyperextension. And then you've got the back end, which is then stepping through. When you look at the bottom image, that horse does do a good stride length, but it doesn't disengage the shoulder to the same degree, and it doesn't cause the rocking and rolling and the extension like it does in comparison with the top horse. So suddenly you're looking at if you just look at the bottom image and you look at the rider in isolation, the rider is not dropping, rocking and rolling. The rider stays relatively still. You look at the top image and you just focus on the rider, there's a lot of excess movement going on.
Yeah, that's really interesting because it mirrors the horse's movement. Does it? Is it?
You know, there is an easy way to look at that, I think. If you consider training yourself walking and you walk with a lot of bend in your knees and hips and like these big hunter steps. And then if you make a hunter step and you fold your leg out and make it the full length, you shift your upper body from low to the ground to very high up.
Yes.
And when you see a horse moving with this joint movement and back movement, you have to have more movement in the top of the horse. If you have a horse that moves with straighter legs and less walk, it's also a lot more still. It doesn't move a lot. And that's what we see. It's like an easy thing to maybe compare with.
Exactly. That's what I mean, is that when you start looking at you're looking at not only the structure of the horse, but also how the horse engages muscles and so on and so forth. And again, it doesn't mean that one is right and one is wrong. We're basically showing up how difficult it is for a judge to compare two horses.
Yeah.
Because
you want to know something interesting too? Total Hope, if you look at him in a picture where he's just standing still without a saddle or rider or anything, he's almost higher in the hind end than in the front end. He's like built in slope down.
Yeah.
Ah, okay.
You can't see this when it's being ridden, but he's not the perfect conformation.
Well, that might explain the saddlery then.
Yes.
that may explain the saddlery.
Yes, it's very difficult. The two most horrible things you can have to fit a saddle: forward sloping horse with a short back.
Okay, so
I think the only thing you could add in there to make it even more difficult would be a shark fin over the angled wither. You sit there and go, right, now that's just the impossible task, really. Yeah, so that makes more sense.
Interesting. Okay, so I'm sure we've all spotted it, but I was looking at their backs.
Yeah.
and how much Becky leans back, and also rider at the top. The horses are fairly comparable here. Yeah. So what's going on here? We've got them at virtually the same phase of the stride. Is this about the knee rolls again? Because this rider has come back off this knee roll. And this one really looks like she's bearing down into the knee or thigh part of the knee roll. Who's going for this one?
Look at the angle of the saddles in these pictures. If you see the cattle in the top picture on Total Hope, you see in the back, you can see the fold of the jacket where the cantle is.
Yep.
There. And look at what angle the saddle has right here. And if you ride on a horse that tilts forward and the saddle is, I thought already when we spoke about the saddle in the first pictures that the saddle was very low in the front compared to the back. Yep. And here in canter, in the moment where the horse is lowest with the front end, you are getting pushed forward by the saddle, which makes the upper body go back to counterweight that.
Yeah.
So I think they are tilting for different reasons.
Yes.
Because Becky doesn't have that saddle problem.
No. The saddle's a lot flatter on the image below than it is on the image higher up. It's the angle. It's the way it's bopping her up the bum, basically.
Yeah. It's like a ski slope.
Yeah, exactly. So she, in order to counter that, she's having to go backwards a lot more to basically help hide it.
It's not the cantle per se that makes it. It's usually for women. It's like a ball that's supposed to keep the pelvis to not tilt backwards, because we don't have a stable pelvis. We need some balance. And for me personally, I have a forward tilted pelvis. So if I get that ball, I'll be pushed out of the saddle forward.
Yeah.
But that slight little lump in the saddle that's going to balance us, when the saddle gets in this way, in this tilt, that pushes us out from the saddle instead.
Yep.
And you do have a board standing right up from the floor. You hold it in your hand and you have your hand on the top of the board. Then you kick it in the lower part. It flips towards you. That's exactly the way the back moves. When the saddle pushes your lower part of the upper body forward, the higher point comes backward.
You saying that, I was just thinking, which rider is better positioned over the horse's center of rotation? It seems to be Becky. I think that it's more difficult for this rider to sit to this horse for whatever reason, but Becky seems to have a lot more plug in there.
Yeah.
So the horse would be rotating about where her knee is, and this one seems to be off. So changes. They both make quite a good job of that, don't they? But there's more movement in the top horse rider, I should say.
Yeah.
Right, just one more time. Does the top rider have a longer leg? It looks a little like it.
She's fairly tall, and the horse is pretty small.
Yeah.
She's definitely got a longer femur.
Yeah. I think I forgot the slow-mo there. Sorry, I'll slow that down. This looks a little untidy to me. So they're coming out of counter into, yeah, there they change, or Becky changed. Now top horse is changing. Okay. So anything going on here to note? This leaning back, and this one, for some reason, has more knee flexion. But yeah, this looks more organized, but very much leaning back, and also behind the vertical here, both of them. So it's almost as if they're decelerating into the corner and looking a bit hectic there. But these are big, powerful horses. It's easy to sit here and critique.
I think Becky's horse is likely to be easier to sit. It's not quite as moving in the back, and
she makes it look easy, doesn't she? But yes, there's less.
I still get the feeling she's clamping on.
She's staying closer to the horse's center of rotation. She's better organized, I think. Whereas this top rider looks like she's panicking a little. Oh, is this the slow motion changes, maybe? Oh, did you see that? How far back she leaned?
Becky. Yeah. That's what I said from the beginning. She is leaning back and she loses her balance quite often.
Okay, so it's loss of balance. It's okay. And the horse just seems to be uncomfortable with that. But this is just a little disorganized, but because they're doing their tempi changes, they have to move a lot to get them. Can you explain that?
Can you show this part of the clip in standard play?
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you want it in standard again? Because surely you can train a horse without doing all that moving around, can you?
Yeah, of course.
Just remember, the horse is a ton. It's 800 kilos. You're not even a tenth of the horse's body weight. So
yeah,
I think the difficult part is that as we ride, we need to keep our posture, but we still need to be relaxed.
Yes.
If you are too tense,
that's the dichotomy.
We sit too still and doesn't allow the horse to move. But if we are relaxed in our posture and the horse makes a movement that we didn't anticipate, perhaps it breaks just a little bit more than we thought they should do, or it jumps forward a little bit, then you get this posture change that we lose our balance of sorts. But I don't think that necessarily means it's bad. It's just maybe the horse did something with a bit more energy than we had anticipated.
Because there's a point where, and it may be the long femur, there's a point where this calf, this heel, touches the saddle cloth.
I think that's her way to ride. I think she rides every horse like that. I don't think that's just because of this saddle. So
okay, so that's her style.
She uses her legs quite high up. I know I've seen in some previous clips where the numna was black from the boots in the rear. So I think that's very dependent of how the rider used their aids. I think when you get your legs up on the saddle cloth, they are too big. I think we should be able to ride without moving that much. And I think the movements that are in Grand Prix doesn't need, there are not so many movements. You have to make those big changes in the leg position.
Yes, I've seen the lower ranked riders having to use the spur very high up for some reason. but maybe it is the position of the knee block, maybe also.
Oh, maybe, but if you see a rider, I mean, we've seen her for many years and she has the same foundation in her eighths.
Yep.
So, and Becky are much more still in the eighths. Yes. But at the same time, if you watch this clip from the front, you can actually see that her legs doesn't move very far from the horse, her knees, I mean. The thighs and the knees are very close to the horse.
But there's a lot of pelvic movement there, rotation.
But that's because they are making the changes in every stride. And that when you sit on the horse, it feels exactly as if you stand on a trampoline, jump into the water. You need to absorb that slight jumping, and that you have to absorb with your pelvis. If you don't follow the horse in that movement, it feels like the trampoline are coming up when you're coming down. It's very unpleasant. But you can see here also in the canter on Becky, you can see she's almost all the time behind the vertical with her upper body.
I know a lot of riders, about 50% of them who are in pain, have low back pain. So I just wonder if it's a weakness in the back.
Of course, it could be that, but I think it's a way of riding too.
Okay.
Some riders have very far tilted back upper bodies, and I don't think that's necessarily too good for the horses. It puts very much pressure in the hind of the saddle. Now Becky doesn't lean back that much. I mean, we have to talk about it maybe to see it, but many riders are actually leaning back so much it can be hurtful to the horses. Okay. And I can understand you do it sometimes. Maybe you can't get the horse to collect enough for the pirouette or something, but it shouldn't be ever can't stride in the entire program, because then it's a way to ride, not a temporary solution.
So I'm wondering what kind of a model these, what we call a leg moving horse, a more extravagant horse. I think they're getting, this one certainly gets caught out in this canter pirouette because there seems to be a lot of leg movement going on there from the horse. There. Whereas Becky's looks more composed.
I don't know. I lost you there for a second. I couldn't see the pirouettes themselves.
Okay. I was saying about the horse being more a leg mover type of horse gets in a muddle. It's really exaggerated in this one, this move. It's almost having problems controlling or proprioceptive issues there because there's just too much legs moving around, whereas Becky's horse looks more composed.
Because the judges wanted large movements, to get a really high point, you need a horse that moves big by itself. You can't sit there and ride every step for the horse. And mostly the canter is not that easy to change. Of course, you can improve it, but you can't change it how much as ever. You can't make it another canter. And then we breed horses to have these extravagant movements that we can't make them have. And this is a product of the scores on competition arenas, because for the sport, the horses are bred for what we need.
Yes, and do you think they're getting more challenging to ride in terms of staying with the movement, balancing with the movement, and having to give aids?
So I think that's more of a temperamental issue.
Okay.
The horses with very much power often have more nerve, so to say.
Okay.
So I don't think that necessarily needs to be because the horse moves large.
I read a fairly recent study which suggested that we've almost reached the limit on sitting to the extended trot. And the study found that comparing national level riders, dressage riders, with international riders, you would expect the international riders to be able to cope better, but they don't. They almost ride the same for the extended trot because of all the power. It's almost as if the horse's movement is too powerful and too fast. It's or the sequence 1 2 1 2 is
Okay.
the tempo is too fast for the rider.
That's actually a bit strange because when you read an extended trot, it's easier to sit if the horse does it right. Than the collected trot, because in the extended trot, the horse stabilizes the back and the hind legs, so you get like sucked into the saddle.
Okay.
Yeah, because essentially what the horse does is engages its core and it recruits more major muscles, so you actually get a reduction in spinal movement.
Yeah. But so if the horse does it the wrong way, it's opposite. Then you get like a catapult.
Yes.
Then it's basically a catapult or trampoline. It's
And this is potentially where high levels of back pain, hip pain, knee pain, everywhere pain in riders is a problem. And Bradley, I wonder, what is it about a saddle that could make it easier to sit to an extended trot if the rider is having problems? It seems to me a bouncy type of saddle with too much fluff would be more difficult because it would be unstable.
So ways which you could help with that depends whether you're looking at saddle design or you're looking at saddle fitting. If you're looking at saddle fitting, you've also then got to look at the girthing structure and how the saddle is kind of attached to the rib cage, so the girth has an impact. Theoretically, when the horse's back comes up, and it also depends on how the horse's back comes up, whether it comes up in front or it comes up in the middle or it comes up at the back, depending on how it's trained. If it's you then have to approach it slightly differently depending on how its back comes up, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
Because let's just keep it relatively simple. If a horse has been overtly trained on a Pessoa and the bum tucks underneath too much and the thoracolumbar junction is elevated too much, that basically then throws the rider forward, and then trying to balance that, you're then basically trying to lift the front end. Relatively simple in terms of trying to balance it. And the same thing if the horse it overly lifts in front and it tilts backwards, then you've got to try and balance the saddle the opposite direction. If it comes up in the middle and it's girthed up theoretically in the middle, the way you try and balance it is you basically try and make, as the most simplistic way to explain it without causing offense. Think of it like you want the stability point in the middle and you want the two ends to be soft and shock absorbing, like, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
Because you've got increased movement of the shoulder and you've got increased power coming in from the back end. Now, if the center part of the saddle is stable and secure, when the back lifts, you want as much softness at either end to cope with the movement of the horse.
Yeah.
Now, I haven't included the rider in this. I'm just saying in terms of horse movement, and this is where you have the problem of dichotomy, because if you were just to put a saddle on and not have a rider on, that is very easy to understand. You know, horse's back comes up, you then, as long as the saddle's secure and it's not moving around, then you make the two ends soft, like a shock absorber. The problem comes then when you add the rider, because the rider, depending on where the rider's going to sit, If the rider is then leaning too far backwards and the back is soft, then all of a sudden the saddle's then going to sink down because you've got load from above pressing down on the saddle. So then the saddle will tilt. And this is why it's, from my argument and the way I talk with the industry, is that there is a mathematical approach which can be taken with this. But
what I notice about this is that the real problem seems to be the riders being pushed vertically and horizontally with each stride.
With each stride of the horse, you've got to remember is that there is a combination of vertical movement, horizontal, like forward, backward movement, and left and right movement to varying degrees in the walk, the trot, and the canter.
Yes.
Now, the difficulty is that the way the horse moves, you want the rider to stay relatively still.
Yes.
Now, if you had one of those stabilization cameras, and this is going to sound really weird, but if you had one of those stabilization cameras and you focused on the horse as a stabilization, you would see how much the rider is moving.
Yes.
And then if you had the stabilization camera and you put it onto the rider, you would then see how the horse moves excessively.
Yeah.
So do you see what I mean? Is the difficulty with saddlery is that you're trying to actually stabilize the horse and the rider separately.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because they have very different movements and requirements. You know, the horse affects the rider because the rider is sat on top. So that's your main generator of force and of all of the issues there. But the problem is then if you overly stabilize the rider, you actually make the rider weaker.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which is where I was saying about blocks and various things like that, is that if you try and interfere too much, you actually create more of a problem later down the line.
And also, the better trained a horse is, so the more years along in the training, the more balanced the horse is, the easier the horse is to sit on.
Yeah.
So that's why obviously we use more balanced, experienced, competent riders riding the young horses, because young horse and novice rider just don't go together at all. Yeah. Okay. Shall we move on?
You can see again here the top rider moving her legs pretty excessively. She uses them all the way from the toe to the hip joint.
Yeah.
And that, first of all, is pretty large aids. And I have the completely different feeling of the rider below because she's not moving the middle part of her legs at all.
Yeah.
The heel should drop in every stride, but it doesn't. It's like a tension pulling the leg up all the time.
Yes.
So they're quite the opposite of each other.
Yes. What are you seeing here in terms of being judged, the movement being judged, the rider being judged?
Well, I think the top horse has much more movement, and I think maybe it's going to get some point higher score, but it's not as steady.
Okay.
Shape as the lower.
Yes.
Horse.
Yes, it's a bit busier, isn't it? So how is this judging done? Do they have a standard in mind, or could you just quickly explain?
Of course, there are a standard. We look at how perfect couple in the perfect movements and would look, but it's also combination of what riders' their performances are in the classes. So when you ride a class, it's usually more difficult to get a high score in the beginning of a class than it's in the end, because of the points that are the standards. They don't want to give the highest points because then they think there could be some combination coming after, making a better impression, and then maybe they can score that as high as they want. But there are many things that are involved in this judging. They don't look at these riders as we do, looking from the outside, because they have to judge how the horses move, how they are in the shape of the body, how they make the movements, the quality of their gaits, the rider's job on top of the horse, how easy they make it seem, if they have a good relaxed rhythm and suppleness. There are so many things that are included in these judgings.
Okay, and then of course the marking, the point system, where they can double up the marks, and I do appreciate how difficult it is. So when we look towards perhaps fixing this brokenness, although for this exercise we're doing, we are looking at the rider who came first, which is Becky below, pitched against the rider who came second. So I think they're both very interesting. They're both a bit different. And I think almost 1% is quite a big difference in Planet Dressage.
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
So you're saying that the judging is both hierarchical, so it's this kind of idealized version of a dressage movement, and it's also influenced by the individuals going in at the competition as well. Right. Okay. So that makes judging nigh on impossible. As a competitor, you, to a degree, you're always held to some form of disadvantage.
Yeah, and that's why the horses need to move good. That's why it's gotten to this point in the movement. Because if I come with a flat horse, I have to be a 10 in every movement, maybe to get to 70%. While a horse that has excellent gaits maybe can be on maybe 6 on the movement and get to 80%, because the horse's way of moving is included in the final scores.
Yeah.
In every point given, the movements are included. But if you think about the movement just being done for the movement, 2 people can make the movement perfect. But one with a better horse, with better gaits, better movements, and more cadence and such things that the horses actually can have built in to them, will get the better points.
And the accuracy as well.
Well, the reasons why I'm asking is because if you're judging something from a hierarchical context, i.e. we have this mythical perfect moving horse, and you're basically grading down from perfect. Yeah. In essence, that shouldn't make a difference in terms of when you are having your test. So, for example, test in the morning, test in the evening, if it's all done by the same judge, because you're always being graded by the same perfection, if you see what I mean. So that's where my point is. And then if you're actually then also turning around and going, well, actually, you're then being graded by the performances of the riders before and after you.
It's not in the rules. It's not supposed to be like that.
That's why I'm saying is because the problem is that you're not being graded against something which is hierarchical, and all of a sudden it's more dependent on the people around you. The problem is that with the hierarchy, it doesn't matter about the individual approach. It doesn't matter about the individual horse. It doesn't matter about whether the horse is an 18-hand big mover or a 16-hand mover. They're always being graded against the same bar. Yeah. If you're also then being graded dependent on the people around you, the difficulty is then that is more heavily influenced by the people around you. As you said, you have to ride in the morning, you have to get 10s, but then somebody in the afternoon can ride and get 7s, but actually because a couple of horses before have not been great movers, suddenly you've got a better mover and it's getting a better result. Yeah. So the difficulty is that if you're having to battle as a rider against 2 massively different grading systems.
And not only that, if you're a well-known rider that usually perform good, then you also have an advantage because it's a judgment sport.
Yeah. Do you see that my difficulty is then all of a sudden it's almost mere pot luck that you get certain results rather than actually the skill of riders. Like, we've microanalyzed these two riders, which are between first and second. It doesn't mean that somebody who came third, fourth, 25th, 72nd down the line, if you microanalyze them, they probably ride better, but they may have been further on. That's just the inherent nature of the level of difficulty that judges have, but also that the riders have.
That can go a couple of different ways when judging a sport, because I've seen, maybe not as commonly, but sometimes it's almost like if someone knows who you are, you get lesser points. That can also be an effect of this judgment sporting.
But isn't it like in events where the highest ranked riders go last?
Yeah. And I think that's a thing of the system, and maybe we could do something to change that. Of course, when you talk about these classes on TV, you have the highest ranking riders last to draw the public to see everything to the last rider.
Yes.
But the thing itself, to have the double tip there, you know, the later you are in the class, the chances of getting higher points are increasing. And maybe they have a lottery or something instead, not to put the best players last, but to mix it up. Just try to get away a little bit from that if it's possible.
The problem is it's all very subjective, that perhaps we need some technology. I don't think we can rely completely on subjective judging, although what I must make a video about is that in this competition, they actually asked the audience and people at home to judge, and the marks were so close between the so-called amateurs, or perhaps those who closely follow dressage, or maybe it was other judges, but it was very, very close for most of the horses. There was only a couple of horses where it was about 3% out, but most of the time it was within a fraction. So that surprised me. And we'll just watch Becky walking out. I just think this horse looks like a happy athlete, doesn't look stressed by what's gone before. I'm now looking at how that girth is working.
I've got your brain going now, haven't I?
Yes.
Yeah.
But it bunches up a little on the now.
It has a Corsetina effect.
Yes.
That's deliberate. There's a reasons why they do that.
But yes, I'm thinking a little bit of bulk under here that maybe shouldn't be there.
Remember that in terms of girthing pressure, the pressure actually in that still image you've got just there, remember that peak pressure of the girth in girthing pressure is when the opposite leg, so the leg which is in the air, which is just about to touch the ground, that is where peak girth pressure is on that leg. So it's not on the leg which is under load. Everyone thinks peak girth pressure is on the leg which is under load. It's not. It is on the opposite. So it's not
this one. It's this one. Yeah.
It's on this one when the leg is just about. So if you were to go forward by like half a second, when the leg is just about to hit the ground, so a little bit more, a little bit there. That is peak girth pressure on that side. So on the side facing us, that is where the most girth pressure is going to happen, around the elbow, just as the foot is hitting the ground.
Wow, that's counterintuitive.
And it's actually relatively logical when you think about it. And this goes back to, I would sound horrible, it's for when you go back to looking at bras. So I apologize, I'm going to talk about bras. If you think about it, if you're on all fours and you have a bra on, and please don't judge me on how I know this. If you were to walk on all fours, when your arm is just about to hit the ground, your rib cage is rotating and expanding into that space. So there's a rolling. Yeah. So right where your cursor is. So that is where your rib cage rolls over because your leg is just about to hit the ground. So if you're wearing a bra, and you can do this at home, do your bra up tight, and then when your arm is just about to hit the ground, you get more of a pull underneath your lat. It's a common misconception in girthing is that we assume that peak pressure is on the leg which is on load bearing, and it's not. It's on the opposite, because you've got the movement of the rib cage, lateral bending and rotation going on.
Okay. Interesting.
You also get pressure, and this comes back to our personal research, where we've done a lot of research on girths, is that you get pressure at the front of the girth and at the back of the girth at different times as well.
You can see that here.
Yeah.
Very clearly. Yeah. Great.
Interesting.
Okay, so that was absolutely mind-blowing. Really, really interesting. And especially about girthing, especially because having seen that configuration in that style of girth, it helps to see.
In terms of girthing, there is very, very little. We don't have a working model of girths. We have a working model of how the spine moves, which needs updating. Thoracic sling and so on and so forth. But if you look at the research, or you look at anybody who's talking about girths, there is no working model for how girths work, or how the sternum works and how the rib cage works. There is no working model, and that is a failing of us, basically.
That's the thing. Some girths put all the pressure on the sternum, and some put no pressure on the sternum. That's
exactly. So this is the problem, and it's something which I personally have done a lot of research in, and I've ended up being geeky and nerdy and written a theory on what we call thoracic mechanics. Basically, we've tried to improve the thoracic sling fit model. So we've now created a 3-dimensional model of how the thoracic area works. And it's interesting is that, through our research, through chatting to professionals, there is no working model of how the sternum and the rib cage moves, and the rib cage moves and behaves very differently from front to back. It behaves very differently left and right, depending on the movement, which is why I was saying about girthing structure, and you get peak pressure when the leg is in the air and just about to hit the ground. That is peak pressure, not on the leg which is load bearing. Counterintuitive, but it actually makes sense when you think about it, because of the way the rib cage side bends and rotates. So this is where you start looking at girthing and how that influences the billets, and how that influences how we fit saddles as well. Arguably, I turn around and say the saddle in itself is actually relatively simple. The problem is when you add a girth on top of it, it then gets very, very complicated, because it's just like fitting a saddle to a static horse is quite easy. Trying to fit a saddle to a dynamic horse is nigh on impossible, because horses move differently. They move differently from one stride to the next. They move differently from one day to the next, and they move differently in terms of their training.
Yeah.
So it's a very difficult thing. One of the next things is the expansion into girths. In terms of the next massive evolution is understanding thoracic mechanics and how girths and saddles work as one. And when we get on top of that, there'll be a huge revelation. But you can see how something as relatively simplistic as a girth can make a big difference in terms of the positioning of a saddle. The image below always had the girth straps, which are quite wide apart. You've got a very diffuse load-bearing area, and then you've got the other girth, which is quite narrow. But again, that's because of the choice of the structure of the horse. So it's all doable. Hey, just woken him up.
Oh,
poor boy.
He's cute.
So, in terms of sitting in the saddle, I think a saddle that is a bit following with a horse with a softer is more easy to sit in.
In the panel?
Yeah. Not in the panel, in the tree. A flexible tree.
Oh, a flexible tree. Yes, but with a flexible tree, you need greater stability with the rider.
For the rider, yeah.
So, saddlery to a degree the theory and the principles behind it are relatively simple. You know, if you have a more structured saddle, it's better for the rider because it's more stable.
Yeah.
But the problem is it's not flexible for the horse. And equally, a more flexible tree is better for the horse, but you need to be a stronger rider or more balanced rider.
Yeah.
Now, there's ways around it. You can do some very clever things to create softness in some areas and hardness in other areas. That's where you have inventions of like flexible points and various other inventions which have kind of done pretty well, but it's always a counterbalance. You know, one company, they very cleverly kind of rounded the points of the saddle of the tree, which was brilliant, but the counter to that was that it became a little bit more unstable. So when it was being girthed up and fitted on, it had a habit of being, if you didn't know what you were doing, then it had a habit of being a little bit unstable. So, and you've got to remember is, in some regards, it's easier to have a flexible tree or a flexible product and to make it stiffer, because you can just add things in to make things harder. More difficult to make things which are rigid softer. You know, you've got to add in a lot more. Now, going back, if you're looking at a saddle and you're trying to make it softer and more, who are you making it softer for? Are you making it softer for the horse underneath, or are you making it softer for the rider on top? Because you can manipulate the materials within a saddle to be really soft for the rider, so the rider sinks into it, and then the foam and the padding for the rider soaks up the rider's movement. You can do some very clever snoring. You can do some very clever stuff with the seat. Or are you trying to make the padding really soft between the saddle or the tree and the horse to soak up the movement of the horse? Or do you try and do a bit of a combination of both? But as I say, the difficulty is we, as an industry, we don't measure, we don't objectify. So the problem is we don't have data, and because we don't have data and we don't have the ability to compare, then all of a sudden we're all trying to solve the issue, but we're all trying to solve the issue in slightly different ways, depending on our products, depending on various things like that. Which is why then you have the invention of numbness, shimmerable numbness, to try and correct the balance and all sorts. I describe the saddle industry as a bit of in terms of its innovation, as a bit of a scattergun approach. There's no kind of linear we're not all working together. We're all going up and trying to solve the issues which work for our products. But that goes back to my argument, is that we don't have a proper working model of thoracic mechanics. And if you haven't got a proper working model of thoracic mechanics, it's like the argument of how do you fit saddles. And I've had numerous arguments online and offline with people saying, right, you've got to fit the saddle 2 inches off the shoulder. And you go, well, okay, that's your stylized view. What about historical Asian culture? Is that they fit from the 18th rib forward? You know, I openly turn around and say, I didn't invent the idea of fitting saddles from the 18th rib forward. That comes from Japan. It comes from samurais. That's where I got it from. And to me, it makes sense. Then you've got the continental idea, is that you actually have the saddle which goes up to the shoulder. They're all right, and products have diversified from that. But we don't have enough, and we don't understand the behavior. It's like when I sit down with people like saddlers and they talk about spinal elevation and everything, I'm like, brilliant. Where's your spine elevating from? Is it elevating from the wither? Is it elevating from the middle? Is it elevating from the back? What about the behavior of the spine and the sternum? What about the behavior of the kind of rib cage in between? What about the rib cage at the back? Does it behave the same at the front? Like all of these things we don't talk about. Like there's no research on the costal joints on the damage which is caused by saddles on costal joints. We all spend a huge amount of time looking at kissing spines and the movement of the spine, but we do not look at costal damage.
That's very strange.
Exactly. And you sit there and kind of go, where does saddles sit? I had a big hoo-ha with a saddler because they were talking about, oh, the spine, it's really important. I was like, please explain to me where the saddle sits on the spine. And they went, well, it sits right there. And I went, well, that's not the spine, that's the ribs.
When I come out to treat horses, I see quite a few having shifts in the ribs from the saddle.
Yeah.
Actually, and they often show this irritability towards the legs, and of course they doesn't want to have the saddle, and they think it's something in the spine, maybe overriding.
That's right. They immediately go spine, and you're sat there going, no, you've got the rib head attaching onto the spine. So, and that's where the saddle sits. Why is there no research for saddlers or for the industry in terms of how the rib heads? I would love to be able to get my hands on some horse cadavers and actually look at the damage done to the spine, and then look at the damage done to the costal cartilage and the rib head attachments, all of that. Because I have a running theory, which I cannot prove because I don't have access to unfortunately dead horses, that actually you're going to find more degenerative processing on the rib heads than you will find in the spine. Because the way the saddles are putting load.
Because we have the tunnel in the middle that covers a bit, even if the saddle gets on the side of the horse. And even if the rider or the horse shifts, the saddle isn't the point. But you don't have anything to account for that shift on the ribs.
Yeah, exactly. And this is what I mean is I was one of the first people to actually talk about rib expansion, and that was probably half a decade ago, where I was talking about how ribs expand when the back goes up, and it's based off maths. Is where I was going through a very nerdy phase of doing mathematics, and I was one of the first ones to start talking about this, and it's not been taken up by the industry yet, but there are people who are starting to go, actually, yes. There is a change, which is nice, but we haven't really looked at that, and because there's so many potentials of where the horse is damaged, and we don't look at it. It's like, and this is going into a bit of a sideline. If you notice, we have a lot of horses with excessive damage into the hocks and to the stifles, and the XI. But funnily enough, no horse has a hip issue. No, hip issues in horses don't exist. I've never actually seen a diagnosis ever of a horse having a hip issue, a hip arthritis. And the reason being is because at this point in time, there is no way of doing an examination, an X-ray or an MRI onto hips in horses. As soon as we figure out a way to X-ray a hip, all of those stifle issues will probably be then excused for a known hip issue. You look at people and you look at dogs. Dogs have slipping stifles. Dogs have stifle issues and everything like that. They can then look at the hips and go, right, there's a problem with the hip, or there's a malformation with the hip.
Yeah.
You look in horses, we've got a huge number of stifle issues. We've got a huge number of SI issues. Nobody talks about hips. Hips are one of the last joints to ossify in the horse. It ossifies at the age of 8 or 9. So
I see quite a bit of problems with hips.
Yeah.
Horses, but I'm not a vet. I'm a body worker.
This is the thing: you can see it as a body worker. You can see how the horse moves as a body worker, but you can't diagnose it. You can't sit there and go, right, that's got a congenital issue with the hip, or it's got a arthritic hip, or anything like that, because there is no way of diagnosis.
And you, Caroline, probably seen a lot of dislocation of the hips, subluxation
of the hips.
Yeah.
No.
You don't.
What I do see that others don't seem to have picked up on is when the horse moves, if you're looking from behind, you're seeing the hips move up and down. What's not normally picked up is the movement backwards and forwards. And I do see a lot one hip flexing more than the other.
Yeah.
Horizontally or rotationally horizontally. That's what I do see.
You can also see if the hips are in a slight higher position on one side, and you can see it being like the pelvis is crooked in a way that one hip is further in front or back of the other.
Yeah, the tilt.
A lot of these subtle changes, and it makes a big deal for the horse in its movements, because you can treat the entire horse at a vet several times, and if those things aren't aligned, they won't be healthy.
Exactly. But this is what I mean is you know, you look at body workers can see all of this, but we can't actually differentially diagnose it because there is no way of categorically taking an x-ray.
Yeah.
If you were suddenly to take an x-ray, you'd find a huge number of horses with hip issues, and a stifle issue is a secondary problem.
Yeah.
It's not the true problem.
Yes, it is.
And we have the same problem with saddlery because we are diagnostically blind, because we haven't figured out how to diagnose it or how to test for it. It doesn't exist. And you're sat there going, it does exist. It's there.
Yeah.
So why?
Wait until it's popular.
Yeah.
And it will come across.
I think we see a lot of pathology with upright hocks. So it just range of motion and restrictions are, I think, most of the issues.
I also think in dressage competition, we look at the horses in these arenas and see a lot of movement issues. They can look lame, uneven, come in and out of the stride lengths and the rhythm, and you know, they can shift quite a lot during a program, and that is not very easy. We can sit on the outside and say this horse is lame. It's obviously lame. And the horse comes out of the arena, comes back to the stable, they go out, check it, it's nothing there, because the tension in itself makes a lot of blockage in the body. And when the movement and the energy doesn't flow freely in a relaxed manner, the horse picks it up somewhere. And it's not very uncommon. It's in the place where they are the weakest, perhaps. Or it can be that the rider isn't in, the rider can be tense. That can block quite a lot of a horse's movements too. And I don't think there's a preview to being top rider. I think sometimes they are stiff in the body as well. Even as we spoke about the pain issue, back pain, hip pain in the rider, that makes a great deal of difference in the movement of the horse.
It's a big problem in elite riders. In most riders, pain is a big issue.
Just letting the horses be horses. I don't think a lame horse should be on the court, but I do think we do have to have a bit of patience with horses being horses. We can't expect the horse to go Grand Prix and not be a horse anymore. I think also those horses with those kinds of motors that they actually do have, because it's not just sitting in an old Volvo. It's really riding a top horse. It's a jet flight. You take off from the ground and it's fast. And with that kind of energy, it goes up to the head sometimes. We want calm horses, but we can't have horses that's so calm they don't do things by themselves. They need that extra mentality to want to go forward, to be able to go these classes. And with that comes a great deal of mental activation. Yes, and I think it's unreasonable to think they aren't allowed to react on the court during a ride. Or
I think the big picture is that horses are absolutely fine and move really well until we put a saddle and a rider on. And of course, the saddle can't do any harm until the rider sits in it.
But even if you send a horse in that's tense, it can move jerky, and I mean, you don't need a rider to make a horse nervous. It will show in their pattern to move.
I think what all this comes down to at the end of the day is that what are we judging? And I hope we're judging healthy movement, and I hope we're not judging stressed horses.
And why I'm speaking a lot about this is because I think if we are forced to make a horse perfect and numb to get into the arena, that is what these riders will do. And I think that's a big hazard.
Yeah.
We need to allow them to be animals if there are animals to be ridden or used in competitive sports. We can't forget that, because to win, you have to make it not the horse anymore. And I don't think that's a good way to proceed.
No, you're absolutely right there. You are spot on. Is that you get a pushing to make it more of a machine rather than the actual horse, and we all fall in that trap. We all fall in the trap of doing it.
I don't mean that we are going to get the points with a horse that is uneven and tense and doesn't do what it is supposed to do in the arena, but I think there's a difference between what point we get in the arena and the hate we get from outside because the horse is reacting to something. It's not compatible.
Well, I think it's quite clear looking at Becky and Jagerbom that she's working on the management of the horse as well, and that to me comes across in the whole demeanor of the horse in terms of how the horse walked out. Just looked like a happy athlete to me. So I think, it's not just about the training. It's all very holistic, and the judging system doesn't make it easy for the ethical riders to rise to the top. So lots of work to do, but at least work is underway.
I'm pretty observant of the rider's way of riding, and this that they clamp on with the legs. It's something I have very good success with the students when I can see that I can help them to be more through in the body and more following with the horse, because Becky doesn't bounce in the saddle. We can see that all of us, but it's not normal. You can't sit on a horse not bouncing. It's not normal. Just sitting there and not being bouncy is a sign for me that something is off.
Do you think that is intentional to hide a lot of things? Do you like?
I don't know.
This is where I was taught. When you ride, you very much ride from 3 points of contact. Arguably 5 points of contact, but 3 points of contact because I was a jumper. So you've got your weight distribution into your seat, your central point, and then you got into your legs and into your stirrups. Arguably, the two other points were the knee rolls, but that was because you were jumping. So when you landed, you kind of dug your knees in a bit and to distribute load and various things like that. But that you're absolutely right. If she's not moving and she's not bouncing to the movement of the horse, she's obviously hovering. She's obviously putting more weight. If you were to look at it in percentage terms, she's putting more weight into her stirrups to basically fit to hover, to look like she's floating and look like she's not moving.
But that can go two ways. She can clamp on with the knees and hold herself in the saddle, or this hovering that you speak about. It's I think.
Well, I'm only saying it. Is it because it's purely visual manipulation? So is she doing it?
Maybe it is.
To say, look how balanced I am. Look how kind of stable and strong I am. And this is.
And I think it gets to a point where it's normal for them. They don't feel it.
Yeah.
Like a rider can drive a lot with the legs of the spur, but they aren't aware of it. They think they are still and not moving.
But I think if the rider's stable, the horse will move better because that's what the horse wants.
I think Becky's horse would move more if she was in her self-balance, because to me, you're not in self-carriage as a rider when you clamp on.
I'm going to throw something out.
No.
As I said about having a video of watching the rider, and you focused on the rider, and then the horse would move too much underneath, and then vice versa. If you focused on the horse, and then the rider would move too much, it's what I forgot what they call it. I think it's stabilization cam or something like that. The difficulty is if you actually did that stabilization camera work on some of her videos.
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean? Is that because you can get programs, video programs, where you can isolate an individual, and then the background moves behind it. If you see what I mean, I've seen it on social media where they've done it with films. That would be quite an interesting one.
Yeah.
Where you can stabilize the rider, and then you can see the movement of the horse, and then you can stabilize the horse. So what happens is the camera tilts with the movement of the horse, but you see then the movement of the rider.
Wow.
Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
That would be quite interesting to see.
Yeah.
Because then you'd see the degrees of movement of the horse in comparison to degrees of movement of the rider. Because I think you've got a little bit of both countering each other, rather than one moving or one moving like that. Do you see what I mean?
Well, because the horse is moving the rider.
Yeah,
but you also, no, I didn't send all the clip to you. I wonder if we still have it. From me riding my horse, when I changed from trot to passage, I didn't do anything else but tilt my pelvis.
Yeah.
And if you think about me clamping on, because if I clamp on with my knees, I can't follow with my pelvis.
Yeah.
How would I do it instead? I would have to use my lower legs and stop somehow with my seat, drive more, because I do stop my seat and then brake with my reins. Just take my reins to me to not have the horse move away. So instead of bouncing with my pelvis and tilting it slightly back, I would have had to maybe put in 10 more eighths in every step. That's quite a lot.
Well, this is where it goes back to the theories and philosophies of saddle fitting.
It's not normal just to move the pelvis, but
Yeah, but if you use the saddle so a lot of people want to use the saddle as a shock absorber.
Yeah.
And you're kind of like, right, okay, shock absorber from vertical load, such as jumping. Okay, fairly easy to do. Shock absorber in terms of the movement. The problem with that then is you've got to have a flexible tree, because you've got to allow the tree to soak up some of the movement, and then you try and do it with padding, and then that's really difficult because the padding will then go flat and go dead, as we call it, relatively quickly. So what happens is your body has to act like a shock absorber for the movement.
Yeah.
So it's all degrees of shock absorption, or movement absorption, however way you want to describe it, and that's the difficulty.
And there is the mystery of the old Steuben, where it was hard as a rock, yet some riders just wouldn't part with them. They just thought they were wonderful. So,
well, the irony is that a lot of flexible trees, where do they put the flexibility?
Yeah.
But it's like flexible all over. You can twist it and you can bend it together. Like it's really weird.
A lot of flexible trees put the flexible point, or the flex, in the middle where the rider sits.
Yeah, I don't think that works in long term.
So in terms of structure, when you're designing saddles, when you design saddles and you look at how the spine moves and comes up, you position the rider in the middle of the saddle, so in the middle third, You don't want the flexibility in the middle. You want the flexibility on either end, basically.
Or that it can twist with the horse.
Yeah.
With the movements.
One person did it. If you've ever seen a tree, what he did was cut lines in the tree, to make a wooden tree flex in the middle. So you could, and I am not joking, he literally got a circular saw on a tree and he cut. So you imagine, right, this is one of my trees. This is the equine tree, which we have. But just thing, what he did was then cut vertical lines like that across it.
Okay.
So what would happen then is the tree would flex in the middle, like that. Okay. Well, the problem is when the horse's back goes up in the middle, it will then flex in the middle.
Yeah.
But you actually want the flexibility at either end. At these parts, you don't want the movement in the middle because that's where the rider sits.
Yeah.
I'm just using my tree as an example, but I'm like,
I saw a tree that was similar to that. It wasn't actually a tree. It was a saddle pad. It was like rounded and there was lots of fingers in the outside. I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah, that's the design which we did.
Yeah, I saw that.
On the point.
So this is our point basically.
Yeah.
So what happens is our point moves independently. So see up there. The idea behind it is quite logical. When the shoulder comes underneath, you have different degrees of movement. So this one is stiffer than this one at the front. So basically, you get almost like a piano key going on. So it's fairly logical, really, when you think about
Very
it.
Nice.
What we also do is we put the gullet bar further back. So we don't have the gullet bar at the front.
Yeah.
Because obviously, if you have a gullet bar at the front, the horse changes shape by quite a far amount.
Yeah.
Whilst if you put the gullet bar slightly further back, it doesn't change as much. It's just,
do you fit the gullet plate to the shoulders or to the couple of inches beyond the withers?
Back.
We'll finish there. I daren't ask if you want to say anything else.
No, I don't think so.
But thank you very much. That was absolutely amazing. And we must do it again. And we'll cover training perhaps at some point. And thank you.
Thank you.
So, thank you very much.
Bye-bye.